My name is Eli Weston, 29 years old, and I'm standing in the marble foyer of the Hillcrest Inn, watching my father's second wedding unfold around me like a scene from someone else's life. The Vermont winter air clings to my coat as I shake snow from my boots, listening to the gentle hum of conversation drifting from the reception hall where relatives I haven't seen in a decade mingle with Grace's polished city friends. The scent of pine garland and expensive perfume fills the space, and I feel like an intruder in my own family's story. I grew up on the Weston farm, a sprawling piece of land that's been in our family for 3 generations, where the morning mist rolls across pastures and the sound of cattle lowing becomes the soundtrack to your childhood. My mother, Sarah, died when I was 19, a sudden illness that swept through our lives like a winter storm, leaving my father, Tom, broken, and my half-brother, Caleb, just 8 years old then, looking to me with eyes that said, "Fix this." So I did what I always do. I put my head down, worked harder, and tried to hold everything together. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For 10 years, I've been the one who gets up before dawn to check the livestock, who works double shifts at Miller's hardware store to keep the farm payments current, who helped Caleb with homework while Dad buried himself in endless projects that never quite filled the hole Mom left behind. I postponed college, turned down job offers in Burlington, and watched friends move away to lives I could only imagine while I stayed rooted to that farm, like one of the old oak trees that line our property. Now here I am, watching Dad beam like a man reborn as he introduces Grace to Uncle Frank and Aunt Helen, relatives who nod politely but keep glancing at me with that look people get when they're trying to place you in a story they thought they knew. Grace looks stunning in her ivory dress, her blonde hair swept up in a way that probably cost more than I make in a week, and when she laughs at something Uncle Frank says, the sound is like crystal bells that somehow make me feel smaller. Caleb appears at my elbow, 18 now but still with those same searching eyes, wearing the suit I helped him pick out last week. "You okay?" he whispers, and I realize I've been standing here too long, watching instead of participating, which is pretty much the story of my life in this family. "Just taking it all in," I tell him, which isn't exactly a lie. Grace's friends cluster near the bar, their voices carrying notes of sophistication that make our Vermont farmhouse vernacular sound rough and unpolished by comparison. Dad moves between groups like a politician, his weathered hands gesturing as he tells stories I've never heard him tell, as if Grace has unlocked some version of himself that was hidden away during all those years when it was just him, me, and Caleb figuring out how to be a family without the woman who held us all together. I should be happy for him, and part of me is, but there's something else gnawing at me tonight, something I can't quite name yet. The dinner tables are arranged like perfect snow crystals under the chandelier light, and I find myself seated between Caleb and Grace's sister Miranda, who spends the entire salad course talking about her Pilates instructor in Manhattan. Grace moves through the room like she was born to this, adjusting flower arrangements and making sure everyone's wine glass stays full, playing the perfect hostess while Dad watches her with the kind of adoration that makes my chest tight with something I don't want to name. During the toasts, Grace's father talks about how she's always known what she wanted and gone after it with determination, and I think about how what she wanted was my father, this farm, this life that I'd been building and maintaining for 10 years, while she was living in her downtown apartment writing marketing copy for boutique hotels. Caleb gives a speech about how Grace makes Dad happy, and his voice cracks just slightly on the word happy, in a way that tells me he's thinking about Mom too, about how we used to be happy before everything fell apart, and I became the glue trying to hold the pieces together. The cake is some elaborate 3-tiered creation with sugar flowers that look real enough to fool the bees back home, and Grace cuts into it with Dad's hand over hers, while the photographer captures every angle like this moment needs to be preserved forever. I'm picking at my slice, vanilla with raspberry filling that's probably delicious but tastes like sawdust in my mouth, when Grace leans over between bites, her voice low and intimate like she's sharing a secret. "You've always been a burden, Eli," she says, and her tone is so casual, so matter-of-fact that for a moment I think I've misheard her. "Maybe now you can finally stop clinging to this family." The words hit me like ice water, and I feel my fork pause halfway to my mouth while the reception continues around us, people laughing and clinking glasses while Grace straightens up and smiles at something Dad is saying to the couple across from us. My father heard her, I know he did, because his shoulders tensed for just a fraction of a second, but he doesn't turn, doesn't defend me, doesn't even acknowledge that his new wife just delivered a verbal slap to his son at their wedding reception. I set down my fork very carefully, the way you handle something that might break if you're not gentle enough, and I realize that my hands are shaking slightly, not from anger but from something deeper, something like recognition. This is what I am to them now, what I've always been, maybe not a son or a brother but an inconvenience, a reminder of the life Dad had before Grace swept in and offered him a chance to reinvent himself as someone who deserves crystal chandeliers and sugar flowers instead of early morning barn chores and the smell of hay. I excuse myself from the table with some mumbled explanation about needing air, and nobody really notices except Caleb, who catches my eye with a look of concern that I wave off with what I hope passes for a reassuring smile. Outside, the Vermont night is crisp and clean, the kind of cold that makes your lungs ache in a good way, and I walk the grounds of the inn with my hands shoved deep in my coat pockets, while my breath makes small clouds in the darkness. The snow crunches under my boots as I replay Grace's words over and over, but more than that, I replay Dad's silence, the way he just sat there and let her say it like it was something he'd been thinking too but never had the courage to voice. I think about the winter when I was 22 and the pipes froze during that brutal cold snap, how I crawled under the farmhouse in the crawl space with a hairdryer and a space heater, spending hours in that cramped, freezing darkness to save the plumbing, while Dad was at his book club meeting with Grace, back when they were still pretending to be just friends. I remember the night I found Rusty, my border collie, as a puppy during a blizzard 3 years ago, how he was shivering behind the barn half dead from cold and hunger, and how I bottle-fed him through those first weeks when the vet said he might not make it. Dad complained about the vet bills, about another mouth to feed, but Rusty became my shadow, the one living thing on that farm who was genuinely happy to see me come home at the end of each day. Through the inn's windows, I can see Grace laughing with her college friends, her hand resting on Dad's arm in that possessive way that marks territory, and I understand something that's been building in me for months, without me really acknowledging it. I'm not losing my place in this family. I never really had one to begin with. I was the hired help who happened to share DNA, the built-in caretaker who worked for room and board, and the occasional grudging acknowledgement that the farm couldn't run without someone doing the unglamorous work. My phone buzzes with a text from Caleb. "You okay? Grace is asking where you went, but she doesn't look worried." Even in his concern, there's that edge of observation that tells me Caleb sees more than he lets on, that maybe I'm not the only one who's been feeling like a stranger at this family gathering. The farmhouse kitchen still smells like the coffee Mom used to make, dark and strong enough to wake the dead, and Caleb is already at the table when I come downstairs, his hair sticking up in directions that remind me of when he was little and would wake up looking like he'd been struck by lightning. He's made eggs and bacon, probably because he knows I haven't been eating much lately, and he slides a plate across the old wooden table that's seen 3 generations of Weston breakfasts. Grace wants me to apply for housing at UVM next fall instead of commuting, he says without preamble, the way he's always gotten straight to the point since he was a kid. Says it would be better for my educational experience to live on campus. He makes air quotes around the phrase, and I can hear Grace's voice in the words, that careful way she has of making suggestions that sound like casual observations but carry the weight of expectations. I take a bite of eggs that taste like comfort and childhood, and I think about what it means that Grace wants Caleb far away from the farm, away from me, and the daily reminders of the life Dad had before she came along to save him from his grief and his responsibilities. "What do you want to do?" I ask, because that's the question nobody else seems to be asking him. Caleb shrugs, but there's something careful in the gesture, something that tells me he's been thinking about this for a while. I don't know, honestly. Part of me thinks it might be easier, you know? Less walking on eggshells. Less feeling like I have to pick sides. He pauses, pushing bacon around his plate. "But I don't want to leave you here alone with them. The word them hangs in the air like smoke, and I realize that Caleb has been watching this family dynamic shift just like I have, seeing how Grace's presence has changed not just Dad but the whole ecosystem of our little world. I tell him about the wedding reception, about Grace's comment and Dad's silence, and I watch his face go through a series of expressions that settle on something like resigned anger. "She said that?" His voice is quiet, but there's steel underneath it. "At their wedding?" "Your dad heard every word," I say, and I don't realize until the words are out that I called him your dad instead of our dad, like I'm already starting to separate myself from the family structure that's been slowly squeezing me out anyway. Caleb reaches into his wallet and pulls out a small roll of 20s, money he's saved from his part-time job at the movie theater in town. "Take this," he says, pushing it across the table, "in case you need to get away for a while, figure things out." The gesture is so unexpected, so purely generous, that I feel something crack open in my chest, not painful, but like a door that's been locked for too long finally swinging free. This kid, this 18-year-old who I helped raise after Mom died, is offering to take care of me the way I've been taking care of everyone else for the past decade. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. May Donovan's Diner sits on Main Street like it's been there since Vermont was invented, all red vinyl booths and black and white checkered floors that have absorbed decades of small-town conversations and coffee-fueled confessions. May herself is 60-something with steel gray hair and hands that tell the story of a lifetime spent working, and when she sees me come through the door she doesn't ask questions, just pours coffee into the thick white mug she knows I prefer, and slides a piece of apple pie across the counter like she's been expecting me. "You look like hell, Eli Weston," she says, which is May's version of a warm greeting, and I find myself telling her about the wedding, about Grace's words and Dad's silence, and the growing certainty that I've been playing a role in someone else's story for so long I've forgotten how to write my own. "Hell." May listens without interrupting, refilling my coffee cup twice while I talk, and when I finish, she sits back and studies me with the kind of direct gaze that makes you feel like she's seeing past all the polite facades to something true underneath. "Honey," she says finally, "you've got to stop living for people who wouldn't notice if you were gone." The words are blunt but not cruel, delivered with the kind of matter-of-fact compassion that cuts through excuses and gets straight to the bone of things. May tells me about her own son Danny, who died in Afghanistan 7 years ago, how she spent months after his death trying to make everyone else comfortable with her grief instead of just feeling it, how she finally realized that the people who mattered would love her through the mess, and the people who didn't weren't worth the effort of pretending. "I could use some help around here," she says, gesturing around the diner that's been her life's work. "Nothing fancy, just someone to help with the lunch rush, maybe handle the breakfast prep. Pays not much, but it's honest work, and it would get you out of that house where you're spending all your energy trying to earn love from people who've already decided not to give it." She reaches under the counter and pulls out a set of keys on a simple metal ring. "These are to Danny's cabin up on Clearwater Lake. Been sitting empty since he died, and I keep meaning to do something with it, but I can't quite bring myself to sell it." She slides the keys across the counter. "Maybe you could use it for a while. Figure out what you want, instead of what everyone else needs." The keys feel warm in my palm, like they've been waiting for me, and for the first time in months I feel something that might be hope stirring in my chest, tentative but real. The cabin sits back from the lake through a stand of pine trees that filter the afternoon light into long golden bars, and it's smaller than I expected, but perfect in the way that simple things often are, with a stone fireplace and windows that look out over water so clear you can see the rocks on the bottom 20 feet down. Rusty jumps out of my truck and immediately starts exploring, his tail wagging in that way that means he approves of this new territory, and I think about how dogs always know when they've found a place that feels like home. Inside, the cabin is clean but obviously unused, with dust motes dancing in the sunbeams and the kind of silence that feels peaceful rather than empty. There's a small kitchen with everything you need and nothing you don't, a bedroom with a quilt that looks handmade, and a living room with bookshelves full of photography books and nature guides that tell me Danny Donovan was someone who paid attention to the world around him. I spend the evening sitting on the small dock with Rusty at my feet, watching the sun set over the lake and feeling something I haven't felt in years, the absence of obligation, the strange freedom of not being needed by anyone for anything, not even for an hour. I pull out a notebook I haven't touched since high school and start writing, not about anything in particular, just letting words flow onto paper the way they used to, before life got so complicated and consuming. The next morning I'm making coffee in Danny's kitchen when I hear footsteps on the gravel path outside, and through the window I see a man about my age with dark hair and a camera bag slung over his shoulder, walking along the shoreline with the purposeful pace of someone who knows exactly what he's looking for. I remember him from high school, Finn Lawson, who was a year behind me and always had his camera out, taking pictures of things the rest of us walked past without noticing. He moved away for college, and I heard he'd become some kind of travel photographer, the type of person who posts pictures from mountain ranges and countries I couldn't pronounce, living the kind of adventurous life I used to dream about before dreams got buried under responsibilities. He waves when he sees me on the porch, and his smile is the same easy, genuine expression I remember from when we were teenagers. "Eli Weston," he calls out. "May told me you might be staying up here. Mind if I grab a cup of coffee? I've been out here since dawn trying to get shots of the winter birds, and I'm frozen solid." Going back to the farm feels like putting on clothes that no longer fit, and I realize how much I've changed in just the few days I've been staying at the cabin when Grace intercepts me in the driveway before I can even get to the front door. She's wearing one of those expensive casual outfits that probably cost more than most people make in a week, and her smile has that sharp edge that I'm learning to recognize as a warning sign. "Eli," she says, and my name sounds different in her voice now, like something slightly distasteful. "Tom's been wondering where you've been. He needs help moving some equipment in the barn, and Caleb mentioned you've been staying somewhere else." The way she says somewhere else makes it sound vaguely shameful, like I'm some kind of vagrant, instead of a grown man taking a few days to think. "I'm staying at May's son's cabin for a while," I tell her, and I keep my voice even and polite, because that's the habit of a lifetime, but something in my tone must be different, because her expression shifts slightly, becomes more alert, like she's sensing a change in the dynamic she thought she understood. "Well, that's nice for a vacation," she says, "but surely you understand that we need you here. The farm doesn't run itself, and with Caleb going away to school, someone needs to be responsible for the day-to-day operations." She pauses, and I can see her choosing her words carefully. "We've been talking about making some changes, maybe downsizing some of the operations, possibly even selling some of the land to developers. But we'll need your input on that, of course." The casual way she mentions selling the farm, the land that's been in my family for 3 generations, hits me like a physical blow, but what hits harder is the way she says "we," like it's her and Dad making decisions about my life, my home, my future, without consulting me at all. "I haven't decided how long I'll be staying at the cabin," I say, and I can hear something in my own voice that sounds almost like defiance. Dad appears in the doorway then, and I wait for him to say something to acknowledge that I'm his son and have some say in what happens to the family farm, but he just nods in my direction and asks if I can help him with the equipment before I leave. "Not before you go back to the cabin, not when you have time, but before you leave. Like my staying away is a temporary inconvenience that will resolve itself if he ignores it long enough." Caleb comes around the corner of the house just as I'm getting back in my truck, and I can see from his face that he heard at least part of the conversation. He walks over to my window and leans down, his voice low and angry in a way I've rarely heard from him. "She can't just sell the farm, can she? This is our home." "I don't know," I tell him honestly. "I don't know what the legal situation is, what Mom's will said, what Dad has signed since then." I pause, looking at this kid who I helped raise, who I've protected from so much over the years, and I realize that maybe it's time to stop protecting him from the truth. "But Caleb, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's time for both of us to figure out what we want instead of what we're expected to want." Spring comes early to the lake, with ice melting into patterns like broken glass and the first hints of green appearing on the trees that line the shoreline, and I realize I've been staying at the cabin for almost 2 months without really deciding to, just letting each day flow into the next like water finding its own level. May has me working breakfast and lunch shifts at the diner, and the work feels different than farm work, still physical, still demanding, but chosen rather than inherited, paid for rather than expected. Finn has become a regular part of my routine, stopping by the cabin most evenings, with coffee or groceries, and stories about the places he's traveled, the photographs he's taken, the life he's built for himself that follows his own interests, rather than other people's needs. He never asks directly about why I'm staying at the cabin instead of the farm, but he listens when I talk about it, and his presence feels easy in a way that makes me remember what it's like to be around someone who enjoys your company, rather than just tolerating it. One evening, we're sitting on the dock watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink, when he shows me some of his photographs from a recent trip to Maine, black and white images of coastal towns and fishing boats that capture something essential about the places and people he encounters. "I'm thinking about settling down somewhere," he says, not looking at me but at the water. "I love traveling, but I'm starting to want a home base, you know? Somewhere to come back to." There's something in the way he says it that makes me think he's not just talking about geography, and I feel something shift inside me, a recognition that maybe I'm not the only one who's been thinking about what it means to build a life, rather than just survive one. "This is a good place for that," I say, and I'm surprised by the certainty in my own voice. Caleb visits on weekends, usually staying overnight on the cabin's small couch, and I can see him relaxing here in a way he doesn't at the farm anymore. He's been accepted to several colleges, including UVM, and he talks about his plans with an excitement that reminds me of myself at his age, before responsibility became a weight I carried, instead of a choice I made. "Grace keeps asking when you're coming home," he tells me one Saturday morning, as we're making pancakes in the cabin's tiny kitchen. "But she doesn't ask like she wants you to come home, you know? She asks like she's checking to make sure you're not." It's such a perceptive observation, so precisely accurate, that I laugh out loud, and Caleb grins at me with the kind of conspiratorial humor that tells me he's not a kid anymore, that somewhere along the way he's become my ally rather than just my responsibility. The phone call comes on a Tuesday morning in late April, when the lake is so calm it looks like glass and I'm sitting on the dock with my coffee watching a pair of loons teach their babies to dive. Dad's voice sounds different on the phone, more formal, like he's reading from a script someone else wrote. "Eli, you need to come home," he says without preamble. "Grace and I have been talking, and we think it's time for you to take on more responsibility around here, especially with Caleb going away to school in the fall. The farm needs someone who's committed to it full-time, and this cabin arrangement isn't working out." There's something about the phrase cabin arrangement that tells me Grace has been coaching him on this conversation, giving him language that makes my choice to live my own life sound like a petulant phase rather than a legitimate decision. "I'm committed to my life, Dad," I say, and I can hear the difference in my own voice, the way it sounds stronger, more certain than it has in years. "But that life doesn't have to be on the farm." "Don't be ridiculous," he says, and there's an edge of frustration now, like I'm being deliberately difficult instead of just honest. "You can't live in someone else's cabin forever, and May can't pay you enough at that diner to support yourself long-term. You need to think practically about your future." What he means, I realize, is that I need to think about his future, about Grace's future, about their need for someone to handle the daily operations of the farm, so they can enjoy the profits without the work. "I am thinking about my future," I tell him. "I'm just thinking about it differently than you expected." The silence on the other end of the line stretches long enough that I wonder if he's hung up, but then he speaks again, and his voice has changed, become colder, more distant. "If you're not willing to be part of this family, Eli, then maybe you should make that official. Grace thinks it might be better for everyone if you signed over your interest in the farm, made a clean break. We'd be willing to buy you out, give you enough money to get started somewhere else." The offer hangs in the air, like smoke, and I understand that this is the real reason for the call, that Grace has been planning this conversation for months, maybe since the wedding, working toward the moment when she could offer me money to disappear from their lives permanently. "I'll think about it," I say, but I already know what my answer will be. I drive to the farm that afternoon with a clarity I haven't felt since I was 18, and thought I knew what I wanted from life, before obligation and guilt, and the fear of disappointing people became the governing forces of my decisions. Grace and Dad are waiting in the kitchen, and there are papers spread out on the table, official-looking documents that someone has already prepared, like they were certain I would agree to their terms. "We've had a lawyer draw up the paperwork," Grace says, "and she doesn't even bother with pleasantries anymore, doesn't pretend this is anything other than a business transaction. It's a generous offer, Eli, enough money to get you established somewhere else, start fresh without the burden of family obligations." The word burden hits me like an echo of the wedding reception, and I realize she's been thinking of me this way all along, not as a person with feelings and rights and a legitimate claim to the life I've been building here, but as an obstacle to the clean, simple future she's envisioned for herself and my father. "I don't want your money," I say, and the words come out calmer than I expected, without anger or hurt, just a simple statement of fact. "But you're right about making a clean break. I'm done trying to earn a place you never meant to give me." Dad starts to speak. Some protest about family and responsibility, but I hold up my hand and he stops, maybe hearing something in my voice that tells him this conversation is already over. "I'll sign the papers," I tell them, "not because I want your money, but because I want my freedom. And I want it on record that I'm walking away by choice, not because anyone forced me out." The morning mist rises from Clearwater Lake like the breath of something alive and ancient, and I sit on the dock with my coffee and my notebook, watching Rusty chase a family of ducks while Finn moves around the cabin's kitchen, making breakfast with the easy familiarity of someone who belongs here. It's been 6 months since I signed the papers that officially severed my connection to the Weston farm, and I'm still surprised sometimes by how light I feel, how much energy I have for my own life when I'm not spending it all trying to manage other people's comfort. Entrées. May made me a partner in the diner, arrangement that works better for both of us than either expected. She gets to step back a little from the daily grind, and I get to be part of building something rather than just maintaining it. The work satisfies me in a way that farm work never did, maybe because every customer who leaves happy is a choice they made, not an obligation they inherited. Caleb starts at UVM in the fall, majoring in art like he always wanted to but never dared to say out loud when he thought his future was tied to the farm. He visits the cabin most weekends, and sometimes brings friends who are amazed that we have this place, this life that looks like a postcard but feels like home. "You were never a burden," he wrote in a postcard from orientation week. "You were my anchor. Now you get to be your own." Finn and I have been talking about traveling together, maybe spending next winter somewhere warm, while May handles the diner with the seasonal help she's hired. The idea of choosing where to go, when to leave, how long to stay, feels revolutionary after so many years of being needed in one specific place by people who never quite appreciated what they were demanding. I've started writing again, not just in the notebook but on my laptop, long passages about family and obligation and the difference between being wanted and being useful. May thinks I should try to get some of it published, says people need to hear stories about choosing yourself instead of just enduring whatever role other people assign you. This morning there's something different in the air, something that feels like possibility, and I realize I'm thinking about the future not as something that happens to me, but as something I get to create. Finn comes out onto the dock with 2 cups of coffee and sits beside me, his shoulder warm against mine in the early morning coolness. "What are you writing about today?" he asks, and I show him the page where I've written the first line of what might become a memoir, might become a novel, might become something I haven't even imagined yet. I thought I had to stay to matter. I had to leave to live. Rusty settles at our feet with the satisfied sigh of a dog who knows he's exactly where he belongs. And I think about how home isn't a place you inherit but a feeling you create, not with the people who share your DNA, but with the ones who choose to love you as you are rather than who they need you to be. The lake stretches out before us like an unwritten page, full of light and possibility, and for the first time in my adult life, I can't wait to see what comes next. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.